The Jubilee of Mercy has begun. The Paris Climate Change Conference feels the Francis effect, and St. Peter's lights up our common home. Hello and welcome to this Jubilee edition of Vatican Connections. The much-awaited Jubilee Year for Mercy has officially begun. Pope Francis celebrated Mass at St. Peter's Square with tens of thousands of faithful. And after the Mass, he opened the Holy Door. But he was not alone for this moment. Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI was also on hand to witness the event and to walk through the door himself. Catholic News Service has more.
Questo anno straordinario è anche esso dono di grazia. Entrare per quella porta significa scoprire la profondità della misericordia del Padre che tutti accoglie e ad ognuno va incontro personalmente. È Lui chi ci cerca, è Lui chi ci viene incontro. Sarà un anno in cui crescere nella convinzione della misericordia. Quanto torto viene fatto a Dio e alla sua grazia quando si afferma anzitutto che i peccati sono puniti dal suo giudizio, senza anteporre invece che sono perdonati dalla sua misericordia. Sì, è proprio così. Dobbiamo anteporre la misericordia al giudizio e in ogni caso il giudizio di Dio sarà sempre nella luce della sua misericordia. Oggi qui a Roma in tutte le diocesi del mondo, varcando la Porta Santa, vogliamo anche ricordare un'altra porta che 50 anni fa i padri del Concilio spalancarono verso il mondo. Il Concilio è stato un incontro, un vero incontro tra la Chiesa e gli uomini del nostro tempo. Un incontro segnato dalla forza dello Spirito che spingeva la sua Chiesa ad uscire dalle secche che per molti anni l'avevano rinchiusa in se stessa, per riprendere con entusiasmo il cammino missionario. Oggi pomeriggio mi recherò in Piazza di Spagna per pregare ai piedi del monumento all'Immacolata. Vi chiedo di unirvi spiritualmente a me in questo pellegrinaggio, che è un atto di devozione filiale a Maria, Madre di Misericordia.
An update on the VatiLeaks trial going on at the Vatican. Now, the trial resumed this week with a series of requests from the various defendants. Among those requests, well, Francesca Sciauqui's lawyer asked for the woman to be granted political refuge in Italy and for the trial to take place in an Italian courtroom. Sciauqui's lawyer claims that the Holy See does not have jurisdiction in this case because the alleged leaks took place on Italian soil. Both these requests were denied because under the Lateran Pacts, the Vatican actually does have jurisdiction to try former Vatican employees in its own court, even if the alleged crime or part of it took place in Italian territory. So Sciauqui's lawyer also asked to be able to call the Secretary of State, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, and Cardinal Santos Abrilli Castello as witnesses. The lawyer for Monsignor Lucio Vallejo Balda asked that emails, text messages, and WhatsApp messages be retrieved from his various devices and submitted as evidence. Also, Vallejo Balda's lawyer asked for a psychological evaluation of his client. That request was denied because the Vatican only accepts psychiatric assessments. Instead, the lawyer submitted a psychiatric evaluation that had already been conducted previously. The two journalists on trial requested that several other books and articles they've written on the issue about Vatican's financial workings be submitted as evidence. Speaking of financial reforms, the Vatican submitted a report to the Council of Europe's Committee of Experts on the Evaluation of Anti-Money Laundering Measures and the Financing of Terrorism, otherwise known as MoneyVal for short. The committee accepted the Vatican's report, meaning everything is on track. The Vatican's Undersecretary for Relations with States said the report and its approval means the Holy See has put in place a functional, effective, sustainable system against financial crime. Now, you might remember a while back, Pope Francis issued some simplified rules for getting an annulment. Those new norms took effect this week on December 8th. So any cases submitted this week will be processed under these new norms. The UN-backed Conference on Climate Change is taking place in Paris. Cardinal Peter Turkson addressed the conference outlining the Vatican's view on climate change and the need for an international agreement. Now, he recalled Pope Francis's words to the United Nations General Assembly back in September, saying, "We cannot remain blind to the grave damage done to the planet, nor can we remain indifferent to the plight of the millions of people who most bear the burden of such destruction." Cardinal Turkson also said that perhaps the lack of ethical guidelines and motivation make these negotiations for agreement so difficult, and he pointed out that the word solidarity is not mentioned in the draft. He also spoke about the growing global awareness that action must be taken, telling the conference that more than 785,000 people took part in climate marches the day before the conference began in order to show their support for a binding global climate change agreement. Now, we've got more on the climate change conference and the church delegation that's there coming up next. Delegates from around the world are gathered in Paris for the 21st Climate Change Conference. Among those delegates are members of Development and Peace, the Catholic Aid and Development Agency or organization from Canada. David Leduc is the executive director of DNP, and he is in Paris taking part in the summit and following negotiations. David, thank you for talking to us. Now, for those who don't know, explain to us what COP21 is.
Well, it's the 21st conference on climate change negotiations. Over the years, there have been certain ones that have had greater importance in terms of legally binding decisions that nations have come together to agree on. The one here in Paris was tabled as one of the most important ones, and the hope was and remains that it will be a legally binding agreement that will force nations around the world to really tighten up their controls around the question of climate and ensure that not only governments but citizens within their countries make the necessary choices to keep the rise in temperature below 2 degrees over the coming years. Now, what's important to remember, I think, for those who are reading the papers and don't follow it, word for word, is that it remains an agreement that will be signed by nations that will have certain sections that don't stand up to the standards, let's say, of environmentalists or of organizations like ours, like Development in Peace. And it will remain citizens' obligations, our obligation, ordinary people, role to ensure that their governments are making the necessary steps to change the course of the destruction of our climate, which is continuing to happen.
The papal encyclical Laudato Si was released with this conference in mind. Is it actually having an impact, like either in the discussion or on the motivation of the delegates? What do you see?
I think there's no question that it's had an impact. If anything, I think it's heightened, if not really infused, the entire discussion with this sense of a moral obligation that is shared the world over, which is something that may not have been felt to the same extent previously. And I think it, as I mentioned earlier, it's inspired. I mean, there are 1 billion Catholics around the world whose ear is available, but it's gone well beyond the 1 billion Catholics. I think the Laudato Si has inspired billions of other people to recognize that this is an issue that is shared the world over, and that it's a collective responsibility, and that we all need to share in taking important steps to work together on this. And I think global leaders have felt it, and the language that you hear, whether or not the actual progress on paper is reaching the levels that we hoped for, the language that they're using, and the desire that I believe they all share to get there, is definitely being heard. And I would say that to a large extent that has been inspired by Laudato Si and by the Holy Father's work behind the scenes, because he's continued to meet with global leaders and to try and impress upon them the importance of working together and of moving forward on this. And I think to a large extent it will continue to have a role in the post-agreement environment, because it's really then and there where the implementation will start. And regardless of what kind of agreement there is on paper, we, the people, will need to continue without question to push our governments to make the necessary and often difficult choices to ensure that our future generations will have a healthy home to live in.
So what do you see as the signs of hope coming from this summit, and the stumbling blocks moving forward?
Well, I certainly think from the perspective of a Canadian that it's very reassuring to see our government pushing on questions of human rights and on questions of the rights of Indigenous peoples within not only the preamble or the narrative sections of this agreement, but really trying to ensure that it finds its way into the implementation part of the document. And so I think that's hopeful. I think it's hopeful for us as Canadians to feel that we have a government really pushing for important change, and a minister that's been charged with facilitating one of the groups. So I believe that's positive. I think, as I mentioned, some of the sticking points remain around loss and damage, and to what extent there will or there won't be the ability of certain countries to move towards litigation. And I think the question around land use is also an area where, unfortunately, there needs to be a little bit more progress made to satisfy many of the environmentalists, many of the human rights activists, many of the people fighting for indigenous rights and their rights to be present on the land in which they historically have had a presence. And I think those are areas that we'll have to continue fighting for in an ongoing way.
I know it's a long day for you, so thank you for talking to us, David.
It's my pleasure, Alicia, anytime.
Let's take a look at the Pope's agenda this week. So, first up, on Sunday, Pope Francis lit the Christmas tree and nativity scene in the lower piazza of St. Francis of Assisi, all from the comfort of his home in Vatican City. Now, this nativity scene was built inside a 7-meter boat that was actually used by migrants traveling from Tunisia to Lampedusa in 2014. And also taking part in the ceremony were 31 refugees from Afghanistan, Cameroon, Nigeria, and Syria, who are right now being hosted by Caritas Assisi. Speaking to the crowd in Assisi via video link, Pope Francis said the boat is a reminder that Jesus is always with us, even in difficult times, and he is stronger than death and evil. Tuesday was a busy day. It started out with a Mass and the opening of the Holy Door at St. Peter's. Then in the afternoon, Pope Francis traveled to the Spanish Steps for the annual veneration of Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception. Pope Francis actually composed a special prayer himself that he used at that prayer service. And after his visit to the Spanish Steps and the prayer service there, Pope Francis stopped at the Basilica of St. Mary Major to pray before the icon of Salus Romano Populi. Then, of course, Wednesday was the general audience. Pope Francis dedicated his catechesis that day to the opening of the Jubilee Year for Mercy, and CNS has details.
Perché un giubileo della misericordia? Cosa significa questo? Quest'anno santo ci è offerto per sperimentare nella nostra vita il tocco dolce e soave del perdono di Dio, la sua presenza accanto a noi e la sua vicinanza, soprattutto nei momenti di maggiore bisogno. Questo giubileo, insomma, è un momento privilegiato perché la Chiesa impari a scegliere unicamente ciò che a Dio piace di più. E che cosa è che a Dio piace di più? Perdonare i suoi figli, aver misericordia di loro, affinché anch'essi possano a loro volta perdonare i fratelli, risplendendo come fiaccole della misericordia di Dio nel mondo. Questo è quello che a Dio piace di più.
Thursday was the start of a meeting of the Council of Cardinals, and Pope Francis was part of that meeting all day. Let's take a look at the resignations and nominations that happened this week. First up, Monsignor Lucio Suriani moves from being an official at the Secretariat of State to Serbia, where he will become the Apostolic Nuncio. That role comes with the title of Archbishop. Replacing him in the Secretariat of State is Archbishop Jan Pawlowski, who was serving as nuncio to Congo and Gabon previously. There's also a new apostolic nuncio to Romania, Archbishop Miguel Buendia. He was serving as nuncio to Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan until now. And there were 2 deaths among the College of Cardinals this week. Cardinal Julian Teresa Sandoval of Santa Cruz, Bolivia, died at the age of 79. He was Bolivia's only cardinal and the first Bolivian-born cardinal. As well, Italian Cardinal Carlo Furno died this week. He was 92, and he was a long-serving Vatican diplomat. He also served at one point as Grand Master of the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre. So with these 2 deaths, the College of Cardinals now has 219 cardinals, and of those, 117 are under the age of 80 and can vote in a conclave. Well, that's it for this edition of Vatican Connections. Now, one of the other events held this week during the opening of the Jubilee year was a light and sound show that was projected onto the facade of St. Peter's Basilica. The show, inspired by Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si', was called Fides Lux, Illuminating Our Common Home. So we're going to leave you tonight with an exclusive look at that light show. From everyone here, thank you for watching. Follow us on Twitter or Facebook or check our blog for updates. We'll see you next time.
Grande emozione, molto bello, veramente una cosa entusiasmante.
I think that's their modern art, so it's really nice that people realize their idea, so I like it.